he is very much in the tradition of the scriptures, the Hebrew scriptures, which say in more than one place, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. You would have heard that. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Jesus would agree with that, but he would take it one step farther. The fear of the Lord is not only a beginning, it is an end. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom and the end of all lesser fears. Jesus understands something about fear that we don't really understand quite so well. Now, we do understand about fear. All of us have our fears. Fears about not enough money, fears about a job, fears about relationships, fears. Jesus understands something about fear that we don't. You can't just say to someone, "Don't be afraid," as if that would just automatically eliminate the fear. Fear can't be destroyed. It can't just disappear when somebody says, "Oh, don't be afraid," and "Oh, good. Oh, the fear is gone." It doesn't work that way. Fear, like other strong emotions, can only be not destroyed, but displaced, pushed out by a stronger emotion. And that's exactly what we see on the back of your insert. Wonderful Peanuts cartoon, yes. Coming to church, we don't even deprive you of your Sunday funnies. Linus, working on the Christmas program. And it came to pass in those days that Lucy, coaching him about his part, that there went out a decree. Linus, "I can't memorize anything. You know what I don't like about Christmas programs? They drive me crazy. They're too hard on the nervous system." "Oh, cut it out," says his sister. "Well, they are. What about that little kid last year who wouldn't even say his piece? He wouldn't even get off his mother's lap. He was scared. He was really scared. And what about that little blonde girl who started to cry when everyone else was singing? Don't tell me that isn't wrong. I'm revolting against Christmas programs." Lucy, very calmly. "Look, do you see this? What is it? It's my part in the Christmas program. I'm supposed to memorize it. All right, now, do you see this? What is this?" "It's a fist. And it came to pass in those days that a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be taxed." And the theologian Soren Kierkegaard expresses it. Because, boy, we can get some pretty good theology in those Peanuts comic strips. "Such is the way a man always acquires courage. When one fears a greater danger, it is as though the other did not exist. And so, for Linus, the fear of the fist casts out the fear of forgetting his part in the Christmas program. Again, it's the principle that emotions don't just disappear. They can only be displaced. And that's what Jesus does in this section. He looks at us with all of our fears. And he says, don't be afraid of people and what people can do to you. But instead of just saying don't be afraid as if that would magically get rid of the fear, he helps displace the fear by saying, I'll tell you what you should be afraid of. Be afraid of God. Because God is the only one who really has the authority that matters. The eternal authority. Be afraid of God. And what happens is then, it's the great fear that casts out the lesser fears. We're no longer worried about people if we've got fear of God. But, oh my gosh, are we worried now about God? Is this a good thing for us to be afraid of God? Has Jesus done us a favor by telling us to fear God? But notice what he does. It's almost as if it doesn't fit at all. First thing he says is, fear God. Yes, I tell you, fear him. And then it doesn't seem to fit, but he starts talking about birds. Are not 5 sparrows sold for 2 pennies? Yet not one of them is forgotten in God's sight. But even the hairs of your head are all counted. And then, do not be afraid. You are of more value than many sparrows. This God whom you are to fear, this God is a bird lover. And as much as he loves the little birds, he loves you way much more. And this God whom we are to fear, and what about the one who teaches us to fear God? Jesus. Notice how he begins this potentially troubling passage of Scripture. He starts off, and I tell you, my friends. This is the only passage in the Synoptic Gospels, the first 3, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, where Jesus specifically calls the disciples his friends. And Jesus is the one who can speak before the heavenly court on that great final judgment. He is there to speak for us. And he calls us his friends. And the end of all this teaching, which starts off with, don't be afraid of people, but be afraid of God. But don't be afraid, because the end of it all, verse 32, do not be afraid, little flock. Do not be afraid. For it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. The God who is the judge. The trial is fixed. Because the judge is our Father who wants to give us the kingdom and to welcome us in. You see what Jesus has done? He's first pushed out all of our little fears about people. Saying, be afraid. The only one that you really should ever be afraid of is God. And guess what? You don't have anything to fear from this God, my friends, because He is your Father. And because He is your Father, you have nothing to fear. Those who learn the proper fear of God have nothing to fear from people and nothing to fear from God. What is this proper fear of God? Well, it starts with a fear of suffering the judgment of God. But then as we learn more about God, it becomes a fear of slighting the sovereignty of God, of giving people more power and authority over us than they should have, which takes that power and authority away from God, as if their opinion matters more than what God's opinion is of us. So there's the legitimate fear of suffering the judgment of God. There's a fear of slighting the sovereignty of God. But most especially, it's knowing that because God is our Father, says Jesus, the fear of God becomes really the fear of breaking the heart of God, of letting Him down. This one who loves us and tells us that we have no reason to be afraid. So the end of the matter is this. Jesus teaches us to fear God. And those who have the right fear of God have no reason to fear people. And those who have the right understanding of God know that we have no reason to fear the God who is our Father. And that's what 1 John tells us. In talking about love, in love there is no fear of judgment, but perfect love, God's perfect love, casts out our fear. So this fear of God, it is the beginning of wisdom and the end of all lesser fears. But you do this already, didn't you? Yeah, you did. Because we've sung in here John Newton's great hymn, Amazing Grace. Remember that one. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found. Was blind, but now I see. Verse 2. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. And in this passage, it's Jesus who teaches our hearts to fear. And Jesus who relieves those fears by assuring us that the God whom we are to fear and respect is a Father who loves us. And because of that, those who fear God have nothing to fear from people and nothing to fear from the God who is our Father. Amen. Reflect for us.
Help us spread the message. Click on the donate button below or go to shermanoakspc.org/donate. Thank you.